Gurmil Magat Sean Corla, is Gurmagat Ganadas Ocht. Minister, I received an email recently, and it said from the Students' Union of Galway that they had received multiple reports from students. They're getting in from students that get the train into the city from Athenry, that it is often full, late, or even cases where students have been refused entry to the train as they do not have a ticket for that specific journey, despite having a monthly ticket that permits them on the train. I assume, if I'm hearing this, you have likely heard it, which I had, and I've heard it from many people, that the trains in and out of Galway are absolutely packed, and that the trains from Limerick and Dublin are similarly packed. Now, the situation at the moment is that there are 17 trains from Athenry to Galway. Some of those originate in Limerick, and some originate from the Dublin direction. And that is, on the face of it, quite a success, because it's not so many years ago that people were saying that it had been foolish to open the Limerick to Galway line. It's also been verified to me that the trains are full when they get to Athenry from Limerick, and that the section of the line that was meant to carry no passengers was, according to Éamon Ó Cuív, the most rapidly growing line in terms of patronage in 2022, and we'll have to see what 2023 brought, but by all records, this is absolutely true. So we've got a great success story, and of course I've often believed that if you build it, they'll come, particularly with railways. We've seen time and again, if you build it, they'll come. In places that people never believed there would be patronage, there is massive patronage. And I think we can say, well, that's great. I'm delighted I was involved in the initial investment, but we need to do more. It's an awful tragedy that people can't get on trains when they paid for their tickets. It's a tragedy that when people want to take public transport, they find that the service can't accommodate them. And I think it's very important that we sweat the assets. We're always talking about the metro, and I've been a proponent of the metro since the last 20 years. But I think it's also important that we do the simple things and sweat the assets. So, Minister, put in simple terms, what could be done? The first thing is more carriages could be put on the trains. In other words, longer trains, better capacity. The second thing we need are longer platforms, so that longer trains can be accommodated, because I understand, particularly on the Limerick line, one of the constraining factors is that the platforms are not long enough to take 6 carriage trains. Slightly more long-term are more passing loops, and the most urgent place, and it is in train, they're going for planning permission, I understand, this year, is to get that passing loop between Athenry and Galway. And that will allow for a radical increase in the frequency of the trains. So, Minister, what I'm anxious to find out today, what programme have the government got on all of those fronts? Longer trains, where there are the capacity and the platforms to take longer trains, lengthening the platforms, which is a relatively simple job, and then putting in the passing loops that we need so that we can get a much greater frequency on these single line tracks. And what we need is a train, not every 40 minutes, but we need to get the trains down to every quarter of an hour in each direction in the long term. But in the short term, can you tell me what's going to be done to make sure that if you turn up for the train, you can get on the train?
I would like to thank the Deputy sincerely for raising this important topic, which you'll understand I'm taking on behalf of Minister Ryan here this evening. And I'd like to clarify, as the Deputy, of course, is well aware, that the Minister for Transport has responsibility for policy and overall funding in relation to public transport, but neither the Minister nor his officials are involved in the day-to-day operation of public transport services. The statutory responsibility for securing the provision of public passenger transport services nationally rests, of course, with the National Transport Authority. However, I do want to reassure the Deputy that Éamon Ó Cuív is working towards a strategy for substantial enhancement of services on intercity routes in the short to medium term, including Dublin to Galway and Limerick to Galway. However, it also must be noted that these enhancements will be subject to agreement and funding by the NTA, as well as the completion of other projects in order to release rolling stock to realise these service enhancements. More importantly, while the existing Éamon Ó Cuív operational fleet is already fully deployed on scheduled services, last year Éamon Ó Cuív took delivery of the final batch of 41 intercity rails, with the carriages to enter service during 2024, as in this year. The exact deployment of the additional carriages is still to be determined, but they should allow for capacity increases across the network. In relation, Deputy, to the Dublin to Galway line, I understand that Éamon Ó Cuív continue to operate the pre-COVID schedule on this line with 10 train services each way daily. Further, I understand that Éamon Ó Cuív intend to implement substantial enhancements in intercity service levels on the Dublin-Galway line, building towards an hourly service in the coming months. More generally, Éamon Ó Cuív is maximising use of their rolling stock to meet demand, and will continue to monitor passenger loadings as you have described. I understand that passenger numbers have recovered significantly post-pandemic, particularly on longer distance rail services. The next significant rail expansion involves 2 initial orders of 185 electric and battery electric carriages for the DART Plus fleet, placed in December 2021, which is 95 carriages, and December 2022, which is 90 carriages. Up to 750 carriages in total are to be ordered over the coming decade. The first 95 carriages will arrive, as I said, from the middle of this year, entering service from 2025. This will allow for further service improvements across the rail network. And I want to reassure the Deputy that the Department of Transport, the NTA and Éamon Ó Cuív are working to ensure the optimised deployment of resources across the public transport network to match changing passenger demand patterns. Deputy, you've outlined what I would consider absolutely reasonable requests, but ambitious ones. And you're right, I don't know if you meant to deliberately quote Field of Dreams, but I fully agree with you that if you build it, they will come. And certainly, as someone who is very lucky to live on a light rail network in my part of the world, of course, you know as well as I do, it has absolutely transformed the commuter experience for so many generations of people now since it came into operation 20 years ago. And the government is committed to make sure that is realised, of course, for Galway as well. And I'm sure that the Deputy or Minister Ryan completely shares this, and I'll absolutely undertake to bring all this back to him and make sure that you get those detailed updates from both his office and the NTA as they develop over this coming year.
Minister Ó Cuív. Minister, I've one advantage over you. I travelled on the old Hartle Street railway line before it was abandoned and sold precipitously. And it was way too slow when they decided to reopen it, and parts of it have been built on. And there's a message, and a salutary message in this. And why did they close it? Because they said they wouldn't have the passengers. They say the same thing about Limerick to Galway. They say the same thing about Athenry to Claremorris. As I said, the people come. The second thing is this. I'm always amused when people start mentioning the DART in an answer to Galway, because there is no DART in Galway. It reminds me of the DART to Dingle. You might remember the DART to Dingle. Well, you're probably too young to remember the DART to Dingle. But it was a kind of Celtic Tiger joke because of the lack of services in rural Ireland. Minister, I don't understand, and you might clarify for me, what is the role of the Minister if he has no role in any of these things? And every time we put a question to the Department of Transport about anything, we're told the Minister has no role in the matter, and I often wonder why we're paying him a salary at all. No, Minister, you know and I know that the Minister has a role, because he who controls the purse controls the policy. And what I need to know is, we've got these extra carriages. I want to know how many of those are going to be deployed on the Galway-Dublin line. And secondly, what are they going to do to make sure that extra carriages can be deployed on the Limerick-Galway line? Because that line, they're literally sitting on the floor in the train. This is the line that was not going to carry any passengers. And the thing that we need are longer platforms. A simple ask. So I need to know how many of these extra carriages we're going to get, when are we going to get an increase in the services outlined here, And what are they going to do to increase the ability of the Galway-Limerick line to have more capacity to measure up against existing demand, not to mind future demand?
I'm interested as well, Minister, and I know you won't have the answer, but maybe you might ask Minister Ryan. It says your reply, the first 95 carriages will arrive from mid-2024, entering service from 2025. Well, if they're coming in 2024, why would they not be put immediately into service? Why would they have to wait until 2025?
Beyond Minister Ryan, I think Ken Corla, Deputy Matthews, is the expert as the rail engineer. He spent 20 years working on the railways in this House, but I'm sure there's a good reason why arrival and deployment, there is obviously a time delay, but I will make sure that Minister Ryan...
Well, if I bought a new car tomorrow, I wouldn't want to wait for 6 months before I could drive it.
No, but I'm sure there's a version of spinning it round the showroom, but I'll make sure that Minister Ryan provides the clarity there, and I'm sorry, Deputy Matthews spent ages here tonight, he would have known for sure. But I think, look, I think just to conclude, Deputy Ó Cuív, and I'm not going to repeat and reiterate things that you know better than I, because you've been there, seen that in relation to what the Department of Transport has been doing in relation to enhance the capacity of the Galway area network when it comes to rail, nor am I going to insult you by being able to state exactly when these carriages are going to come online, because you know and I know I don't have that exact answer. But I think you do raise an interesting point, and it's one that there's no need for a philosophical debate, but you served in government a heck of a lot longer than I do, so you know exactly the role of a minister and the role of a state agency, and the frustration that all of us feel when the reply isn't directly forthcoming from the minister's office. However, the budget that has been allocated to the Department of Transport, the budget that has been allocated within Department of Transport to ensure that we have a massive increase in public transport services, particularly in rail and indeed light rail, wherever it may be in the country, has been increased year on year, and it's a budget provided to the NTA to make sure that there is realistic ambition based on various feasibility studies. I 100% agree with you, and of all people, I know Minister Ryan is massively committed to you on the upgrade of services into Galway from Limerick and Dublin via Athenry. This will be achieved. I don't think it's going to be exactly at the rate and the timeline that you aspire to. I fundamentally think it should be, but there's lots of issues at play. However, I will absolutely ask Minister Ryan to give you a direct response from his office and not deferring it to another agency about when the new 41 carriages exactly will be deployed, in relation to how many will be deployed to the lines them specifically, and of course to you, Ken Corla, more generally about when they'll actually get on track.
Okay,